The sun was setting behind the skyline of the small town of Riverton, casting a golden glow over its bustling streets. The local grocery store, Jones Mart, was busy as usual. The aisles were filled with the chatter of neighbors catching up and the hum of shopping carts being pushed around. It was a typical Friday evening, and everyone was gearing up for the weekend. In the middle of this scene, an elderly man in a worn-out jacket walked through the automatic doors. His name was Frank Wilson, a retired Army veteran who had served his country with pride. Frank was well known in the town for his quiet demeanor and kind heart. Despite his age, he was still fit and carried himself with the unmistakable air of a soldier. Frank moved through the store with purpose, picking up the few items he needed. As he approached the checkout counter, he noticed a new clerk behind the register. The young man was tall, with slicked-back hair and an air of arrogance that seemed to follow him around. His name tag read Tyler. Frank placed his items on the conveyor belt and greeted Tyler with a polite nod. Tyler barely glanced at him, too absorbed in his phone to acknowledge the older man properly. When he finally did look up, he gave Frank a once-over and smirked. "Got your military discount card, old man?" Tyler asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Frank nodded and reached into his wallet to pull out the card. Tyler snatched it from his hand, examining it as if it were a fake ID. He scanned the items, making exaggerated sighs and rolling his eyes at the slow pace of the transaction. These old folks, always wanting something for nothing, Tyler muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Frank to hear. A few customers in line behind Frank exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked away, unwilling to get involved, while others seemed ready to step in but hesitated. Frank, however, remained calm. He had faced far worse in his life than a rude store clerk. Tyler's next words crossed a line. "Bet you just sit around all day, living off the government, huh? Must be nice to do nothing and still get paid." The silence in the store was palpable. Frank straightened up, his eyes locking onto Tyler's with a gaze that could freeze water. "Son," he said quietly, "you have no idea what you're talking about." Just then, the store manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, emerged from her office. She had overheard the entire exchange. Karen had known Frank for years and had always respected him for his service and his humility. "Tyler," Karen said sharply, "my office, now." Tyler scoffed but followed her, muttering under his breath. The door closed behind them, and the muffled sounds of a heated conversation ensued. Meanwhile, Frank gathered his groceries and headed for the exit, nodding to the sympathetic customers who offered him apologetic smiles. As Frank reached the parking lot, a young woman approached him. She was in her late 20s, with a toddler on her hip. "Mr. Wilson," she began, "I just wanted to thank you for your service. My father was in the Navy, and I know how much you've sacrificed." Frank smiled warmly. "Thank you, miss. That means a lot." Before Frank could continue, the doors of Jones Mart swung open. Tyler stormed out, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Karen followed, her expression stern. "Tyler," she called after him, "you're suspended. We'll discuss your future here on Monday. And you owe Mr. Wilson an apology." Tyler spun around, his pride wounded. "I'm not apologizing to anyone," he spat and walked off, leaving the store manager shaking her head. Karen approached Frank, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Frank. That was completely unacceptable. I promise we'll handle this." Frank nodded, appreciating her words, but not wanting to make a scene. Thank you, Karen. It's all right. I've dealt with worse. The weekend passed, and on Monday, the townspeople buzzed with curiosity about Tyler's fate. Many hoped he would be fired, while others believed he deserved a second chance if he showed genuine remorse. As the clock struck 9, the doors of Jones' Mart opened and Tyler walked in. His usual arrogance was replaced with a subdued demeanor. He approached Karen's office, knocked, and entered when she called him in. "Tyler," Karen began, "do you understand why what you did was wrong?" Tyler nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Yes, ma'am. Frank Wilson is a respected member of this community and a veteran who has sacrificed a great deal for our country. Your behavior was not only disrespectful, but also ignorant." Tyler swallowed hard. "I know. I'm sorry." Karen studied him for a moment. "You will apologize to Mr. Wilson. And until I see a genuine change in your attitude, you'll be on probation. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Tyler repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That evening, as the sun set once again over Riverton, Frank was back at Jones' Mart. He moved through the aisles, greeting familiar faces and picking up his groceries. As he approached the checkout counter, he saw Tyler standing there, looking nervous and out of place. "Mr. Wilson," Tyler began, his voice shaky, "I'm really sorry for how I treated you. It was wrong, and I had no right to speak to you like that. I hope you can forgive me." Frank studied the young man for a long moment. Then, he extended his hand. "We all make mistakes, son. It's how we learn from them that matters." Tyler shook his hand, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, sir. I promise I'll do better." As Frank left the store, he felt a sense of satisfaction. In his years of service, he had learned that true strength wasn't just about fighting battles, but also about showing compassion and understanding. And in that moment, he knew that Riverton was still a place where people could learn, grow, and become better versions of themselves. Thank you so much for watching. I put a link down below about something very interesting you'll like. Go check that out. Subscribe for more. See you on the next video.